I realized as I left the stage yesterday morning after interrupting you for the first time that I don't think I've actually ever introduced myself. My name is Catherine Carlton. I'm the Executive Director of Orchestras Canada, Orchestres Canada. But that said, it is day 3 of our first national conference since 2019. I've been a housebound introvert for most of the last 3 years, and I've suddenly been plunked in the middle of a human tsunami. Honestly, I'm no longer sure of my name, the year, or where we even are. But it's okay. We're all going to be fine. Right? Yes. So, just to reflect a little bit before I move into what I describe as my apocalyptic presentation. When we began designing this conference back in the early fall of 2022, we had a few goals in mind. We wanted the event to include plenty of time for informal connection, exchange, and possibly even a bit of commiseration. The bus rides, the meals, and the coffee were all part of our dastardly plan. We wanted to welcome new voices to this community and help reconnect old friends from the before times. We wanted to celebrate the assets and the generosity of our host community and our host orchestra. We wanted a schedule that had enough content to be satisfying, but not so much that it was bewildering. We wanted to provide useful context and information to you as you think about the months and years ahead. We wanted to get over the fear of being provocative, but we also wanted to balance provocation with safety and with care. It's really constraining if we always have to avoid saying true and difficult things, and such constraint can severely limit creativity. At the same time, we knew we needed to take ownership of the consequences of being provocative. Finally, we wanted to tap into the creativity, leadership, practicality, and energy that each one of you brings to your daily work. You are action-oriented people. And I'm now going to go off script and tell you a story from our conference in 2009. The last day of the conference, we had scheduled a board orientation session for new members of the Orchestras Canada board at the hotel restaurant. And we were set to meet at 7:30 in the morning for the start of the orientation process. I arrived at 7:15 and nabbed a big table for the group of 6 that I would be meeting with. 7:30 arrived, no one came, no one came, no one came. At 7:35, I went to find out what the heck was going on, and I discovered that each of the 6 people that I was supposed to be meeting with for the board orientation session was sitting at their own table. They arrived at the restaurant, they took command of the situation, and they got themselves a table that would be big enough to accommodate everyone. Every single person. And I'm simply going to say that what that told me about the nature of people in the Canadian orchestral community is if you had T-shirts printed in English, not sure what the direct French translation would be, it would be, if it's to be, it's up to me. Right? So just think about that for a moment. So in trying to take that into account in the design of today's session, we knew that we wanted to get you to be thinking through where to from here. We need you to grapple with some big, juicy topics, the ones that you live with every day, every month, every year. We want you to share your perspectives with your peers on the basis of the sound level in every one of the rooms that I've been in with you. This won't be a problem. And then see if we can help to start the conversation about a collective agenda for the time ahead, tapping into your brilliance, your energy, your focus, your commitment. So here's how the morning is going to unfold. You're going to listen to me for about 20 minutes longer. I will lay out some perspectives on the situation of Canadian orchestras, inspired by the research that OC and other sector partners have done recently and over time. If I'm going to ask you where to from here, I figured it might be good to establish a baseline about what here actually is. We'll divide you into smaller working groups. You should have been sent your assignments on Feedloop. If not, it's coming to you imminently. And we'll be sending you off to breakout rooms to share and record your thoughts on one of 8 juicy and important topics. My colleagues Boran and David from Orchestras Canada, along with superstar consultants Eric Dubois and Jeanne Lesage, and I will be dropping by to help if needed. And then you'll return back here for a report back session. This is probably the toughest thing to organize in that we're asking you to make a 5-minute presentation from the conversations that you will have had over the course of an hour. But enough about you and enough about the immediate future. Here's my presentation. Let's start with some numbers. Let's see if this actually works. All right. Okay. We've been on a roller coaster ride the last number of years. And thanks to C. Stephen Smith, sitting in the back corner, and all of you across the country who have provided Steve with financial and audience information, we know a few things about the roller coaster ride that we've been on since mid-March 2020. And I'm not sure how visible that is, and I also hate reading directly from PowerPoint slides, but even thinking about year 1 of the pandemic, earned revenues down 88%, donated revenues down 26.6%, government revenue up 56.8%, overall revenues down 23.9%, expenses down by 31%, total accumulated surplus, bizarrely, up by 18.77 million. For the group of 73 orchestras who participate in our comparative report each year. That's a massive change in a very short period of time. And this is all using 18-19 as our baseline year, so our last complete season pre-pandemic. At the end of 21-22, things were changing, but still massive change from 18-19. Earned revenues down by 52%, donations down by 16%, government revenues up by 39%, overall revenue down by 13%, expenses down by 13%, slight additional contribution to total accumulated surpluses because the numbers are rounded. Total accumulated surplus up to 21.47 million for those 73 orchestras. So we're fabulously wealthy, right? Not so fast. And of course, we all know that we don't yet know what the 22-23 numbers will be, but it's pretty clear that we're not back to normal and that the concept of normal will elude us for a while. Some other thoughts about those numbers. Here's the truth. Summary figures obscure individual challenges. Last season, even though there was that significant accumulated surplus position, 24 orchestras reported operating deficits greater than 2% of expenses. That's compared to 0 orchestras in 2021. In a relatively normal pre-pandemic year, I'm going to choose 2016-17 as a baseline, that year 9 orchestras reported operating deficits greater than 2%. So normal year, 9. Last year, 24. Let's now look at a much bigger data set. And this goes to Statistics Canada and their research on the cultural sector. And to define the cultural sector, it's not just orchestras. It's not just not-for-profit arts organizations. It ranges from individual creators to major commercial enterprises to the not-for-profit arts sector as well. So we're in there, buried in within film, television, publishing, video games, individual creators, galleries, museums, so forth. If it's creative, it's in the mix of cultural organizations. But we're seen to be rebounding. If you add all those numbers together, you've got the rebound happening. So the real GDP for culture in the fourth quarter of 2022 was 5.2% above pre-pandemic levels. Yay, we're back! Except not so fast. Real GDP for live performance, the sector that we're in, was still 11% away from full recovery. So we're still 11% down in the fourth quarter of 2022. At the same time, jobs in live performance have bounced back somewhat, but are still 5.7% lower than pre-pandemic. So we're understaffed and we've got even less money. Think about that one. Let's talk about jobs. Now, we run a job board, as many of you will know, and this is like a microcosm of a microcosm. How many jobs are listed on Orchestras Canada's job board? In a typical year, we'll advertise somewhere between 120 and 140 jobs. Year one of the pandemic, we advertised 45 positions. Think about that. 21-22, we advertised 250. In our fiscal year that wrapped up on March 31st, we advertised 232 jobs. This is musicians, conductors, administrators, typically in Canadian orchestras. That signals a lot of turnover in our sector. What's going on? So I'm next going to read you an excerpt from some research done by the Ontario Nonprofit Network. It is a feisty advocate for the broader not-for-profit sector in Ontario and their commitment to decent work, good pay, good conditions, respectful workplaces in the broader sector is really inspiring. But here's their analysis of the challenges. This is so depressing. Burnout, high stress, low morale, vicarious trauma, mental health concerns, all of which lead to resignations at the board, leadership, and other staff levels. Pushback against a return to in-person work and pre-pandemic hours and conditions, leading to early retirements, resignations, and departures from the sector. Uncompetitive pay, limited benefits, lack of job security, leading to struggles to recruit and retain people. Poor succession planning, leading to a limited pool of candidates who are ready to take on leadership roles. And difficulty recruiting volunteers, leading to lower capacity and weaker community connections. Are they describing your world too? Okay, so that's sort of life in the office and life backstage. Let's talk about what's happening on stage. And for this, I'm actually going back to some old resources because I think this is a fairly radically understudied area, as Bob Fraser and Richard Sandals pointed out yesterday. I'm actually going to quote from an address that Ernest Fleischman, longtime CEO of the LA Phil, made to the graduating class of the Cleveland Institute of Music in 1987 in a talk called "The Orchestra is Dead, Long Live the Community of Musicians." And this is what this longtime advocate and worker on behalf of our sector had to say about good jobs, or jobs in orchestras. Is it fair to a gifted young musician who has spent perhaps the first 15 or 20 years of his or her life slaving away at perfecting his or her technique in musicianship, only to look forward to a future of increasing boredom, artistic frustration, and disillusionment if he or she seeks a career, a musical life in orchestra? Let's also consider, it gets more fun, the world's scariest ever ranking of relative levels of motivation, job satisfaction, and opportunities for professional advancement. This comes from a study undertaken by Richard Hackman and Jutta Almendinger in the 2010s. Whoops, okay, we're missing a slide. That's fine. You'll just have to listen to me read. Job motivation among symphony orchestra musicians was off the charts at the highest level of ranking. Job motivation. People are incredibly committed to getting it right. I think we all know this. It's years of training. It's a commitment to professionalism. It's a whole series of things that cause people to say, this is the thing that I want to do, and I want to do it superlatively well. Let's move on to job satisfaction. Symphony orchestra musicians ranked 7th out of 13 job roles, just below federal prison guards. So their commitment to doing it right, doing it well, is not necessarily matched by pride and joy in the work. Think about that. Let's also talk about satisfaction with professional growth opportunities. 13 different job categories. Symphony orchestra musicians ranked ninth, again, just below federal prison guards. This is sad and terrible, but it also makes sense. You win your first job, you're granted tenure, and then what? An extremely cynical but funny friend of mine has called this the long slide to the bottom. Is this acceptable? And what's with the prison guards? Yikes! Okay. Let's just take a moment. We can sigh and move on. I want to get back onto the roller coaster and contemplate some other numbers. Let's take a look at what audiences were doing over the pandemic. Don't want to remind you, but I guess I have to. Live audiences declined 98.1% between the last pre-pandemic year and 2021, from 2.843 million people to just over, think about this, fewer people than live in Peterborough, Ontario, 53,000 people right across the country. In 21-22, live audiences rebounded to just under 1.1 million people, but still a long way away from the pre-pandemic 2.8 million. Online audiences, and this is maybe a sign of hope and joy, we don't have baseline measurements for 18-19, but online audiences were estimated at 5.183 million in 2021, dropping to just under 3.2 million in 21-22. We don't know about this year yet, but here's some of what you've told us through OC's rolling ticket sales survey as of January 1st, 2023. You are budgeting year-end 22-23 ticket revenues at 98% of pre-pandemic levels. Let's see if I've actually got a slide for this. Yep, there it is. January 1st actuals, you'd hit 62% of target. You reported that you were forecasting total seat occupancy for the year at 95% of pre-pandemic levels. Concerts scheduled up to January 1st were at 54%, but your sales for concerts, total sales for the year, including concerts after January 1st, were at 66%. At peer group meetings, you've told us that audiences are buying later. The price per ticket is going up because audiences are not making use of package discounts. In many places across the country, audiences and revenues are rebounding, but we're also detecting high levels of anxiety from one week to the next. Will the next concert sell? And we're seeing a rebalancing between subscription and single ticket sales. At this point, and next year, of course, is still hard to predict. So again, let's pan out to some bigger data sets beyond just the Canadian orchestral community. Whoops, there we go. So since the pandemic began, Business and Arts, with the support of the National Arts Centre and some generous private donors, has been working with pollster Nick Nanos to do a regular recurring survey of cultural patrons to get a sense of their attitudes, experiences, and plans for the future. In January 2023, here's what they said about their spending plans. 24% intend to spend less in 2023 than they did in 2022. 18% intend to spend more. Younger culture goers are more likely to say they intend to spend less than older culture goers to attend performances this year. Culture goers from the prairies in Ontario anticipate a higher net negative change in their spending in 2023. Those from BC, the Atlantic region, and Quebec anticipate a higher positive change in their attendance. So this is not an even depressing situation or an even joyous situation. Regional patterns are discernible. I'll also take a look at some big data sets from the United Kingdom. And this comes from the Audience Agency, which has access to box office data from a broad array of performing and cultural groups in the UK. 1/3 of respondents are attending less frequently than pre-pandemic. Over 60% cite the cost of living as the principal driver in this decision, and they expect these concerns to grow over the next 2 years. Only, and I kind of underline only, 25% of respondents say that they are attending less due to COVID concerns. 41% say they are buying tickets later, but thank goodness for the over 65s, they're less likely to report later booking. People are also expecting to donate less, with 50% of existing donors saying that they expect to donate less in the next 12 months, and only 17% not expecting to reduce donations. So some pictures are forming for sure. Going back to the online participation data, because I think that really was one of the high points of the pandemic for many of us as we were locked up at home. In 2021, Orchestras Canada, with help from the Digital Strategy Fund at the Canada Council and the folks at the Arts Firm, undertook a study on Canadian orchestras' digital initiatives in the first year of the pandemic. Now, who does not recall the flurry of activity in those first 12 months as we ping-ponged from postage stamp lockdown videos to goofy and charming Facebook Live panel discussions, masterclasses from home, masked and distanced ensembles of various sizes in otherwise empty halls, the celebratory elbow bump, the challenges figuring out how to end a concert without applause, that heartbreaking moment as the final chord decayed and there was no opportunity for a joyous eruption into applause, and also the extraordinary reach of education programs and just what that meant for many of you and for many learners of all ages across the country during the pandemic as your reach expanded if you had the program to match that need. So what we learned from all of this was collectively we can absolutely move, learn, experiment, and execute really quickly when we have to, when we have the time, a workable labor agreement, and at least a few of the resources necessary to do it. No limits on imagination, right? We learned that. There were some genuinely beautiful things that happened, and many groups found audiences, old and new, for their online offerings. We also learned that some groups had or have digital evangelists in their midst who are simply waiting for their moment to shine, and shine they did. And even when, this is the sad part, even when pandemic supports from government were high and live performance for live audiences was not an option, the economics of digital content capture and sharing were punishing. It's not the same as selling live tickets to a live performance. The figures that we got, somewhere between 5 and 10% of revenues came in from digital content compared to what would have come in had those been live performances, to the best of our knowledge. But let's look at some more industry data. And I kind of hopped the slide thing because I'm getting nervous. Bear with me. Really interesting research on how people connect with music in 2022. And this comes from the International Federation of the Phonographic Industry. You'll note that 4% of people polled connect with music through live performance. And we head on down through social media, short video apps, TikTok or Instagram Reels, streaming on things like Spotify, purchasing music. There still are some die-hard music purchasers of hard copy content and digital downloads. Radio is still a thing. Video streaming and streaming on paid subscription services. But you see where live music consumption sits in that pattern, 4%. On the other hand, from our rolling survey on ticket sales in October 22, we asked a question about people's online programming plans among the Canadian orchestras. This was a small group of 33. Whoops, let's go back. I edited myself. Across the 33 orchestras who responded, 12 orchestras were offering hybrid performances. 3 orchestras were also offering online-only content, but in-person only performances made up 87% of orchestras' planned performances in the 22-23 season. So 4% connect through live performance, and yet 87% of what we were putting out into the world this season was live performance only. Okay, so let's ponder this one. As I was driving out of Brentford on Wednesday afternoon, I had the privilege of driving on Wayne Gretzky Parkway. And I was reminded of that famous line that people use when they're trying to Canadianize a speech. They quote from Wayne Gretzky. And it's the famous line where he's asked, what's the secret of your success? And he says, I skate to where the puck is going to be. So my question for you, live performance, online presence, are we skating to where our audiences are going to be? If not, where are we skating to and who are we leaving behind? No easy answers on this one at all, even a bit, but I think we have to think about it. Okay, let me move on to the slide that I really intend to show now. So some of you, I think, were in Marco's session yesterday where he was talking about concert presentation formats. Some of you presented at that session. Very exciting stuff. So we're going to leave the online thing behind and take a look at ways in which live performance can be animated. And, we are, as a group, really focused on live performance in one or more acoustic venues. Business as usual. How's that matching up with evolving audience expectations? And I'd like us to ponder a bit the phenomenon of the immersive experience, those events that use a range of digital, technical, or event design strategies to help a broad range of patrons get closer and establish a different kind of relationship to a work of art or works of art and to the moods, feelings, and atmospheres that they invoke. Who hasn't seen a zillion ads for candlelight concerts on their Facebook or Instagram feed? We've all been targeted. And this is what Marco, who was with us yesterday, chairing that panel on new modes of concert presentation, said about them. And I'm going to go a little bit deeper than the short quote on the slide. People do not attend candlelight concerts because of the artists and may not even care what music is on the program. They attend for the romantic atmosphere and the overall experience. I carry on. It gets worse. It is bitingly ironic that commercial producers were the ones to figure out how to market classical music to a broader audience after decades of supposed audience development work by orchestras. Whether orchestras can bring a new level of quality and creativity to immersive experiences based on classical music remains to be seen. So, fever may be eating our lunch. What are we going to do about it? The thing that we are so very good at and that we were initially so relieved to return to may not be as attractive to prospective audiences as it is to us. Can we persuade them to change? Or do we choose to evolve? Let's now talk about orchestra's presence in the charitable and not-for-profit sector, a sector that is itself undergoing a bit of a revolution in public confidence and trust. In the United States, a recent report by Independent Sector revealed that 56% of people surveyed said they trusted the not-for-profit sector. Someone's phoning me. In fact, it's the alarm monitoring system from my house. This may be a message. Okay, always turn off your phone. Okay. Okay. Focus. We can do this. My house is on fire and I'm talking to you. I'm sure there's a symbolism in there someplace. In any case, there has been a 3% drop in public confidence in charities and not-for-profits in the US since the pandemic started. In the UK, a Charity Commission survey revealed that only 51% of people surveyed said they trusted charities. Key factors that they want to see in order to regain trust: a high proportion of charities' money is used for charitable activity. Charities are making the impact that they promise to make, and the way that they go about making that impact is consistent with the spirit of charity. We may want to think about how we define the spirit of charity, but I think that's a really important thing to contemplate. How we do things is, if not as important, quite important as it's somewhere in the mix in terms of how we are judged. Now in Canada, we're seeing a number of self-styled charity watchdog groups coming into being, organizations like Charity Intelligence that have made it their business to rank and recommend the best charities to would-be donors. They use criteria like financial transparency, quality of reporting on results, demonstrated impact, need for funding, and the percentage of donations allocated to core charitable work. And they use all of that, put it into a blender, and come out with an overall ranking. Charity Intelligence has done the work to rank a few Canadian orchestras, and not one of you gets more than 2 stars out of 5. Here's what their Director of Research, Greg Thompson, has observed. Some charities create a lot of change with the donations given to them. Others have almost nothing to show for the money coming from donors. I mean, I can take a lot. This is specious. It's mischief making at a high level when it comes to the hard work that Canadian orchestras do and the contributions that they make to community. But it may also indicate that we have some work to do to effectively communicate and measure what we are trying to do when we bring together groups of musicians to perform for and spiritually animate our fellow humans. What impact are we trying to have? How well are we organized to accomplish it? And how are we measuring and reporting on it? Do we have work to do? Or is it better strategy to ignore these questions because they're annoying and we lack the vocabulary to respond? I mean, we're doing a wild pivot here. This is like the world's worst patchwork quilt. But I'm going to continue anyway because I need to finish the quilt. Let's talk about eco-sustainability. This word has so many meanings in our sector, and we often read it as code for someone else's definition of mid to long-term financial sustainability. I'd suggest that we replace it with the famous definition provided by the United Nations convened Brundtland Commission back in 1983. Namely, meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That kind of 7 generations thinking, those teachings from our Indigenous colleagues, we need to be thinking that way. Now, I want to pay tribute to the province of Quebec and to the leadership work that many of our Quebec colleagues have been at for a few months now at least, in terms of the requirement to start working on environmental sustainability plans for their orchestras. It's in response to a pending requirement from the Conseil des Arts et des Lettres du Québec. And at Orchestras Canada, I have to admit, we've been tiptoeing around this one for a few years now, hosting a webinar here and there, and collecting and sharing resources from groups like Julie's Bicycle, the Scottish Classical Music Group, and closer to home, Scale, the Centre for Sustainable Practice in the Arts, Music Declares Emergency Canada, and Creative Green Tools Canada. What I think we know by now, climate change is real, and while individual organizations like orchestras can't solve it, we surely have a role to play, whether it's through the themes we explore through our repertoire choices, or the multitude of operational decisions we might make about the venues we use, the artists we engage, travel schedules and transportation, both for internal stakeholders and for our audiences, what we print and don't, while keeping in mind that our ubiquitous smartphones aren't exactly benign, our waste reduction and disposal efforts, and our selection of suppliers. What might environmental sustainability, eco-responsibility look like for this sector in the years to come? The end is in sight, but I do have some more apocalyptic data to share with you. Demographics. So I want to take a quick look at demographics in our sector while admitting that there is very little good Canadian data on orchestra demographics, thanks to a combination of interlocking privacy legislation at the provincial and federal levels, and the challenges and the costs of collecting this information both respectfully and securely. So I'm going to turn to the US for some perspectives. The League of American Orchestras will be releasing more data this spring. So I have to go back, but it's been a while. I have to go back to 2016 for a report that they published then on demographics in American orchestras. So there was a 4-fold increase in the proportion of diverse musicians on stage between 1980 and 2014. I will note, however, that it was driven largely by an increase in musicians from Asian and Pacific Islander backgrounds. And again, this doesn't strike me as surprising, given the pitfalls of just visual inspection, but understanding that that's a reality. However, the wider orchestra field, conductors, executive, staff, and board members, remains predominantly white. In some roles, mainly conductors, there are indications of positive change. In others, there is an absence of change. Big differences between large orchestras and smaller ones. The percentage of musicians from African American and Hispanic Latino backgrounds engaged by smaller orchestras is double the percentage of those employed by larger orchestras. However, conductors from African American and Hispanic Latino backgrounds are more likely to be employed by larger orchestras than by smaller orchestras. In 2016, women conductors were still rare, especially in the high-status position of music director. Of course, we're seeing transitions there about bloody time. Now, the League began collecting race and ethnicity data on orchestra board members a little bit later. They didn't start doing that till 2010. Since that time, the percentage of non-white board members has hovered at just under 8%, including 3 to 4% African American and 1 to 2% Hispanic Latino representation. For comparison, a national survey by Board Source found that the representation of non-white people on nonprofit boards across the U.S. had gone from 16% to 20% between 2010 and 2014. So orchestras at 8% kind of stuck at that number. The broader sector went from 16 to 20%. So clearly, boards were being recruited from largely white populations. So these aren't Canadian numbers. As a sector, we don't have them, but not knowing our numbers doesn't protect us from the possibility that our organizations don't look a lot like the communities we serve. Representation matters, but more importantly, so does participation matter. So where does all of this leave us? In this highly idiosyncratic overview, I've touched briefly on data on orchestra finances and audiences, our digital presence and capabilities, a lot on the human angle, audiences, jobs, representation, and participation, our responsibilities to and impact on the planet and society. Honestly, there's so much more to say on so many other topics about the development and enlivening of repertoire, about music education at all levels, about the implications of decolonization for orchestras, for instance. These omissions are indefensible, but temporary, and I'd be thrilled to return to them at another time. But now, let's turn to the working part of the morning. The reason for the title in your program, this is the session that couldn't be a webinar. We need to put you to work. So the framing question for the conversations that you're about to embark on is, 10 years from now, what is your orchestra like? So we've talked about where we are. We're now talking about where we're headed. Where to with orchestras? 10 years from now, where are we? We've identified 8 areas of focus. We've assigned each one of you to a group. You should have received your assignment in Feedloop a little earlier today. My colleagues will be around to help get you to the right place. So, topics. First, group 1 is going to talk about programming and presentation. What is your orchestra playing? Where are you playing it? How are you presenting it? That group will be meeting at the front of the Albion room. Flip chart, paper, all the stuff is there, along with assignment discussion guides. Group 2, audiences and donors. You'll be meeting in the middle of the Albion room by the second flip chart. Who's attending, in person or online? Who's giving? How have subscriptions or single tickets or membership models evolved? And how have you managed relationships across those transitions? Group 3, collective care and internal culture. What kinds of workplaces are we, and what values do we manifest in our daily work? That group is meeting at the back of the Albion room. Okay, group 4, the social and educational role of orchestras. What impact are we trying to have? How have we organized ourselves to accomplish it? And how are we measuring and reporting on it? Group 5, digital sophistication. Now, I admittedly talked about content capture and sharing. There's so much more to what digital is and means. So the questions are, how are we using digital tools to connect and engage with audiences, enliven performances, eliminate monotonous tasks, and understand and mobilize our data better? That group will be meeting in room 205. Okay, the controversial one, maybe. I selected this group specially. Dying with dignity. Yes, it's come to this. If winding up our organization is the only option, what's our legacy? What choices can we make to do this better? You're meeting in room 203. You've got a window. Please don't defenestrate. Group 7, addressing inequality in our organizations, in our broader society. What do we stand for? What changes have we made in the ways we work, and who participates? That's in room 202. And finally, the eco-sustainability group. That will be in room 201. And full transparency, this is a French-first gathering, in part because of the work that our Francophone colleagues have already taken a leadership role in. If any of you want to reassign yourselves to one of the other groups, that's okay, but I think that this might be a good opportunity for our colleagues from Quebec, not only to be encouraged to speak in their maternal language, but also to share back some of the perspectives that they have gained from the work that they have already done on eco-sustainability when it comes to the next part of the program, which is reporting back. We're going to give you an hour together to work. You will be supported by the occasional visit by a friendly consultant who will just check in on you, see how you're doing. Your job is to prepare a 5-minute, extremely high-level summary that you will be presenting back to the group. Simultaneous interpretation will be available for that. And again, I encourage you to speak in the language that you're most comfortable with, and interpretation will be available. We have provided a discussion guide. There are hard copies in each one of the rooms and on each one of the tables where we're asking you to meet. You will not get through the entire discussion guide. Don't stress. It was really just a way of saying, if no one wants to talk to anybody else in the room, here's how you structure a discussion.